This week, as I was getting ready to take down our Christmas tree and put all the ornaments carefully back in their boxes, I came across this one that I just couldn't put away yet. Now, I know you can't see it from where you are. It's a little girl elf wearing a Santa hat, and she's carrying a sign that says, "Youngest child, Mom's favorite." It's true. My mom gave it to me herself. And if you do not believe me, go ahead, check the back. She dated it 2011. That was the year she finally settled the age-old debate. You see, as long as I can remember, my brother Jason and I have debated who indeed was Mom's favorite. I don't know if this is something other siblings do, but we definitely did. When we were young, it would start out if one of us got in trouble and the other one didn't. That was just absurd to us. And so we would say, well, it's because you're Mom's favorite. That's why you're not in trouble. Never mind whatever action we did or took. As we grew older, it was nothing more than just sibling rivalry, where we would get, if we were bored, I think, into these debates. And we would list all the things that are great about us as to why we must be Mom's favorite. Well, I got better grades than you do. I must be Mom's favorite. Yeah, well, I'm faster at swimming than you are, so I am Mom's favorite. It would go on and on and on. No matter how it started, it always ended the same way. I would say, yeah, well, I'm the youngest. I must be the favorite. And my brother would say back, no, they just couldn't risk having another one of you. So they stopped. I, as the firstborn, will always be the favorite. Now, this went on and was insufferable to my mom, so after 24 years of putting up with it, she decided to finally end the debate. On Christmas morning, 2011, she handed my brother and I both a present, and she said, open them at the same time. Well, I opened mine up a little faster than my brother, and I let out a triumphant laugh, ha-ha, and shoved it in his face and said, I told you so. Imagine my shock when my brother opened an ornament, a little boy elf with a giant Santa hat holding a sign that says, oldest child, Mom's favorite. And he shoved his ornament in my face, not so fast. Well, like the mature young adults that we were, we turned to my mom and said, that's not fair. We cannot both be your favorites. You have to choose. But my mom refused our system. She would not budge. She said, no, I am Mom. If I say you're both my favorites, you're both my favorites. That's it. You have the ornament to prove it. Still to this day, when we don't let the old joke go, my mom says, you've got the ornaments. I've settled this a long time ago. When I came on this ornament, I was thinking about this, and every year when I put the ornament on my tree again, somewhere proudly that my brother will see it when he's visiting, I remember the story. I remember my mom refusing our system, our way of judging who it was that was the favored one. How she put her foot down and said, I get to decide, and I say you're both my favorites. My brother still thinks it's a consolation prize that my mom is just saying to make me feel better. But my mom insists. She is Mom. She gets to decide. When I was thinking about this story, when I saw this ornament, I couldn't help but think how in the stories we hear today, God has already settled it too. Not with an ornament dated 2011, but in the stories, in the life of Jesus, his ministry, his death, his baptism ministry, death, his healing, his resurrection. In the story today that we hear of Peter preaching the good news to those considered outsiders when the Holy Spirit comes upon them? And Peter says, now I see that God has no favorites. God has settled it already. God invites far more than we perhaps might or choose to. God refuses our own system of how we would determine who is most favored and who is not. God resists our way of judging based off accomplishments or status or based off of how we worship. God instead has settled it with an invitation thrown wider than we can imagine. It's as if Christmas morning, 2011, in the stories, everyone opens an ornament, Peter and Cornelius both, God's favorite on it. Imagine the shock. Imagine perhaps the dismay. God has settled it. That's what our stories this morning remind us. That God has opened in the waters of baptism for any who long to enter them. God says, come. That is the whole of the story that we heard in Acts, the story where Peter, who was a good, faithful, observant Jew, who followed Jesus and also kept laws of community and purity, who knew the insiders and the outsiders and the system that made it good, he was also the one who would go and surprise himself when God called him to Cornelius, that Gentile, that outsider, anyone outside the Jewish community. And when he showed up, he started speaking a faith that was not at all new to him. Peter begins with a faith, declaring a faith that is almost like a creed for him, declaring the good news of Jesus, declaring his birth, his healings, his teachings, his death and resurrection. This is not new for Peter. For Peter, this is known and familiar and good, a faith that is well worn for him. He declares it, and yet declaring it to Cornelius, the God-fearing outsider, automatically brings something new and different to this faith. There's something new and different about it, as if God hands them both a gift at the same time and says, open it at the same time. Inside, a reminder that all are somehow God's favorites. For something new and different happens when Peter declares, truly now I understand what the prophets talked about, the forgiveness of sins for all who long to be forgiven and known by God. Now I know what it means that God has no favorites. Or, dare I say, God has way too many favorites for us to imagine. In the story, God has settled it, has opened up the life-giving waters to all who would long to come to them. God reveals something new and different. That's what the season of Epiphany is about, all the ways in which God is yet revealing something new to us about how God is. Just like my brother and I learned that it had nothing to do with our system of keeping score, nothing to do with our own accomplishments that made us more worthy, more favored by my mom. So it is that here, it is God who decides. What is revealed is that it is all about God who has decided and chosen all who long to come. It's not about what we have done, our worthiness, our privilege, our one-upmanship of each other. There's no more gatekeeping at the waters. All are invited who long to come to them. Suddenly, the invitation is thrown wide. Suddenly, that voice that spoke when Jesus came into the waters, that voice that spoke from heaven, calling him beloved, God's own Son, the one that fills God with joy. Suddenly, it's as if because of Christ, the waters would open and that voice longs to greet every one of us who comes. That same voice longs to speak and welcome and affirm us as God's own beloved, the ones who fill God with joy. No matter whether we are Peter or Cornelius, insider or outsider, with a well-worn, well-familiar faith, or one that is brand new, that we may not even be sure is faith yet. Thanks be to God that the Holy Spirit would come while Peter is speaking and fall upon all who listen, reminding us that the Holy Spirit longs to fall upon each and every one of us and already does. No matter whether you are the youngest child or the oldest child, whether you have a resume a mile long full of reasons why you are the favored one, or whether you come with a list of things that you only pray God's forgiveness is big enough to cover. The invitation is before us. God has settled it. And my friends, it is even better than an ornament. It is the waters, the life-giving waters of baptism that flow and invite each one of us, all who long to come, to receive them and know the good news of God. May you too remember that God would call you favored, beloved. All who long to hear it, God already speaks your name. Amen.